those present in the room speaking with the help of those who are remote. For those on Zoom, please stay on mute when you're not speaking. Also, if you are connected by phone, please do not put us on hold as it was and step away because you would have music and disrupt the meeting. If you need to speak, unmute and say, Mr. Chairman, this is, and identify yourself, and I will recognize you. Once we are done speaking, please remute your line. If you need some help, feel free to email or text Martina Eldon, and we'll try to monitor both and respond to your requests. You should receive emails and phone numbers for use. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Anybody online have any issues? Okay, we'll do the invocation. Woody, could you that?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this group of people that protect our natural resources. As this is December, the day after Pearl Harbor Day, I'll be a little patriotic in this prayer. This country, a lot of people, like Mr. Dole, who died this week, what great men and women who served in World War II. This nation. All of us in this room have to realize something. What made America great was its people. But if you really stop and look deep into America, the natural resources this country has had, whether it was in its mining, whether it was in its timber, or its farm fields, what really made us great was our water and our natural resources. That's why it's our job to leave this country, this state, and our counties in better shape, which we think, for the next generation. And give us all wisdom and guidance to do a better job of what we have to do before us.
Thank you.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Termination of a quorum.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum present in the room, plus several members online.
Okay, we'll begin with welcome and introductions. I'm going to go around the table. I will start. Jason Bellers, Chairman, Lancaster County, and I'll go to my left here.
Jeff Stonehill, King George County.
Keith Hodges, Delegate 98th District.
Ryan McDougall, live in Hanover, represent Caroline and most of the northern Middle Peninsula. And it's fine, part of life.
It's from Carolina County.
Joseph Step, Hanover, Carolina Soil and Water Conservation District.
We have some Western County Board of Supervisors.
Chris Parrish, Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors. Joshua Cole, delegate from the 28th District, the city of Fredericksburg and Stafford County.
Tom O'Halloran, for the Soil and Water Conservation District.
Emmett Hanger from the Senate. I live in Augusta County, but I'm on this commission because I represent Tom Culpeper, Madison County, and Greene County on the same mountain.
Elton James, staff.
Online.
Let's start. I'm going to call out the member's name and you can introduce yourself, just to kind of keep us from all stepping on each other. Delegate Bell.
I'm Rob Bell, delegate from the 58th District, Albemarle, Greene, Fluvanna counties. Bit of Rockingham, but for these purposes, Fluvanna, Greene, and Albemarle. Thank you.
Delegate Guzman.
Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, representing the 31st District. I live in Prince William County, but I represent Fauquier County for this commission. Thank you.
Delegate Weber.
Delegate Michael Weber, represent the 18th, Fauquier, Culpeper, Rappahannock, and Warren counties.
Supervisor Yao.
Yeah, Carter Yao, Board of Supervisors, Madison County.
Last member present, Supervisor White.
Yes, Jim White, Board of Supervisors, Orange County.
Go around the edge of the room, starting on my left here.
Aaron Wood with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation.
Mike is here.
Van County Supervisor elect Rappahannock County.
Jeff Walden with the Center for Natural Capital and Rappahannock.
Shannon Garner with Trump.
Brent Monsignor with Friends of the Rappahannock.
Lance Gregory with the Virginia Department of Health.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming today.
Three more members of the public. I'm going to open it up for our three members of the public who are with us. We'll start with our attorney, Elizabeth Andrews. Call her off, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Andrews with the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School. Thanks, Eldon.
And let me jump way up the basin, Michelle Edwards.
Hello, Michelle Edwards with the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission. Thank you.
And now we'll bounce down the other end of the basin, John Bateman.
John Bateman, Northern Neck Planning District Commission.
And the other one you see is staff. So that's Martina James now, and she's keeping me above water, managing the technology.
Keeping you straight for now. Well, welcome everybody online and welcome everybody in the room. Next up is review and approval of the agenda. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion is carried. Next up is the consent agenda. We have the minutes from September 22nd, the work plan update, the financial report, and the adoption of the electronic meeting policy. Ellen, do you want to make any comment on any of those before we have a motion to approve any of those?
Everybody received them in advance. It's pretty standard fare. Obviously, the meeting policy is what everybody's been dealing with. It's having to write revised meeting policies. And this conforms with the requirements of FOIA.
Any questions on any of those items? I would move that we approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. Next up is the chairman's remarks. We have some retiring members who are going off into the good life as they transition into a different form of service or a different position in their life. I heard somebody may be going to Key West, so that sounds like a pretty good thing to be heading to and after the cold winter sets in. But it's been a pleasure to work with you all, and I wish you all the best. We have Delegate Joshua Cole from the 28th District, Chris Parrish of Rappahannock County, Cindy Lamb of Stafford County, and Delegate Mark Cole of the 88th, and Billy Withers from Fredericksburg, who's not here today. But I'd just like you all to put your hands together and congratulate them and thank them for their service to the commission and to preserving the natural resources of the Rappahannock River Basin. Thank you all.
We're going to come to you. And I wish you can fit that with both. Thank you, guys. We will get the other three. I was expecting Cindy Lamb today, but we will get those to her as well as Mark Coles and Billy Withers. Matter of fact, all three were planning to be with us, and within the last 2 days, they've had work or other obligations come up and they had to change plans. So, and I'll just note one footnote. This year was Mark Cole's 20th year with the commission. And I just think that's worth noting. The longest tenured one here right now, since your tenure was interrupted. When districts got shuffled somewhere along the way. Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you all again and congratulations. Next up, we have the public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comments, please come forward, identify yourself. We'll start within the room first.
There is a microphone there if you feel so inclined. I don't know that it's necessary.
Thank you for having me here today. Big public comment. I was speaking with you later on behalf of the Rappahannock roundtable as well, but as this is public comment, my name is Brent Hudson. I'm with Friends of the Rappahannock watershed group that seeks to strive for a healthy and scenic Rappahannock River. As we are almost into the legislative season, I just wanted to have a chance to quickly present our legislative priorities that Friends of the Rappahannock has come up with. I work with Brian Kaufman and Gary Christian as well on this program. We broke this down into funding needs and policy goals. Making this real quick, water quality programs, we are working for full funding of the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share, as well as an increase in the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. The demand for that program has skyrocketed over time, as well as there are some issues with the technical assistance with that we will be working with legislators on, hopefully this session. Others, SLAP, stormwater local assistance, towards our the 2025 WIP deadlines. We hope to be able to provide full funding for the localities to work on giving them the funding they need for their stormwater programs. Wastewater treatment plants, obviously we've made much progress with our wastewater treatment plants. There are several counties in the Rappahannock watershed that are looking to shut down some plants and upgrade others as we go. So we are going to be looking for funding for those as well as Commonwealth-wide, as well as $3 million a year we're supporting for the Virginia Department of Forestry to increase our urban. One of the biggest things for Friends of the Rappahannock is going to be, and I presented this morning and last week as well, is environmental literacy. There's a big void at the top at the state level for environmental literacy. So we are seeking funding for a full-time equivalent position for environmental literacy coordinator for full funding with that, as well as maintaining environmental literacy programming funding. That is a grant program that funded last year. Also goals, competition, statewide resilience master plan. Obviously, right now, yesterday, there was an announcement for the coastal resilience master plan. We are hoping, and we would appreciate a lot of support from everyone to try and use that river and make that statewide. As well as tree canopy conservation legislation. Right now, you were missed by to say that very much so in negotiation with multiple stakeholders. And then, as well as preserving progress that FOR feels we have made, living shorelines, emphasis on nature-based solutions for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which is a statewide fund, I may add, as well as some tidal wetlands guidance, and then amendments to the CBPA that we made this year. We also would highly support maintaining the ban on polystyrene and plastic bag fees. Frenchburg is one of the localities that has recently passed the plastic bag fee. The reason for this is most of what we find in our watersheds and in the rivers that we take out increasingly is polystyrene and small pieces of plastic that are breaking down. As we have done our litter cleanups, we are literally seeing our bags of trash with lighter and lighter as we're picking up more foam and plastic than other things that we've seen in the past. So I thank you for your time. I look forward to any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else present in the room who would like to make public comment? Seeing none, is there anybody online who would like to make public comment? Close the public comment. Move on to our number 5 item on the agenda, accelerating the scale and rate of living shorelines implementation. Before we do that, I would like to go back. Cindy has arrived. I'd like to congratulate her on her service to the commission and give her a little token of our appreciation.
The sandwich was worth.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do I have to say anything?
Oh, if you'd like to give a 1-hour speech, we did allocate a little bit of time for you.
I really did enjoy that. I do want to say is this is like my favorite committee. It is, and I've shared that Tom Cohen used to be my predecessor, And I finally said, can I please just take your place? Because I really like this. I love the things that we do. And, you know, all the things that we can do for our environment and the world in the future is all in this room. How cool is that? Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay. We'll move on to our first presentation.
Aaron, do you have it turned on?
Yeah.
Aim it towards the computer up here. All right, never mind, the battery just died. Why not? I'll advance, you just tell me.
Great, excellent. Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Wynn. I'm with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, specifically the Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service. And glad I can be here. I talked to y'all technical committee, I think back in July about the same topic. So I'm glad to be here talking to the commission. So next slide. I am with the Virginia Department of Conservation. With my obligate PCR slide about kind of 4 things leading into the final thing. So I want to tell you what I do, my perspective, where I'm coming from. I'm going to talk about living shorelines. So we're all kind of thinking the same thing. You know, I want to give kind of an update on what shoreline management, living shorelines look like from the perspective of the WIP. And then we're going to talk about our new grant that we got for living shorelines. Next slide. Yeah, even the next one is good. So, you know, what's a property owner to do if they see their shoreline being undercut like this? I'm gonna move real fast just to these next pictures. Next slide. You know, here's one of a whole chunk of several chunks of trees just caving off the bank. What's a property owner to do again? Next slide. Here's a couple of houses right on a cliff. That house in the middle is kind of striped, right? It's got brown and a white stripe. And so if you look at the next slide, you can take that reference point. That's on the Potomac, just downstream of Westmoreland State Park. So that was a cataclysmic shoreline caved off, and some of those homes right there are no longer habitable. Next slide. There's lots of quick fixes out there that property owners have done right on the beach area, and their house caves in. Next couple slides. You see quick fix. We have seen quick fixes like this with tires, concrete rubble slabs for those work. So next slide. So somebody in their infinite wisdom in the General Assembly established Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service in 1980. So we've been around for 40 years providing service to the Commonwealth and our citizens. We provide free science-based technical assistance on shoreline management alternatives. Work with private property owners. We also work with a variety of land management agencies, federal agencies, state agencies, as well as localities. We also work with non-governmental organizations on some of their programs. And when we were established in 1980, we focused on tidal shorelines. So we're only really in the tidewater, but we do work statewide. Actually, we'll go look at non-tidal stream banks and pounds as well. Next slide. So what do we do next? Just go ahead. Next couple. So we provide on-site field investigations for those property owners. We'll go out to their property, help them understand what's causing their erosion on the shoreline, and we'll start talking about solutions. We'll follow that up with a written advisory report that includes those recommended solutions. We can review designs. We can't really do a design for property owners. We can help their design of their contract and make a better design before it goes into a permit. And then we can come out and do construction inspections. Next couple of lots of times property owners really don't know what's in their plan, don't know what that contractor might be doing on their property. So we can help them understand if they're getting what their design or their plan and the permit calls for on the shoreline. And finally, we can help connect folks to available financial incentive programs, particularly for living shorelines. And the takeaway for our property owners is that all these services are no cost to property owners, because the General Assembly has provided for myself and my colleagues, 2 of us, that provide this service to the county. Next slide. All right, let's talk about living shorelines. So we're all thinking about the same thing. So tidal shoreline erosion.
Yeah, I'm on.
Okay, so tidal shoreline erosion is the dominant source of sediment to the Chesapeake Bay. It's like something like 57% lots of folks don't, they tend to forget that erosion is a natural process and it does have positives. So shoreline erosion does provide bank to downstream, downtide, beaches, and they help marshes accrete and sea level rise, but of course that excess sediment and nutrients can have negative qualities. Just as a point of perspective, there's some shorelines that have lost as much as 30 feet per year on the average. I think Matthews County facing Chesapeake Bay, and there's other ones that accrete or gain as much as 10 feet a year. Shoreline. Next slide. This is publicly available. It's about Hardway at VIMS. The Institute of Marine Science has looked at historical erosion rates. So you can go up there and look at any site in tidewater and look. He's compared it to some of the earliest aerial imagery, 1937, to more current times. And you can look in there and zoom in and out and see what that historic erosion rate. It's a really good data set. That's like 80+ years. It's a really good data set to look at shoreline erosion. Next. So what can a property owner do? This is a continuum of green to gray infrastructure. When we talk about living shorelines, of course, are on that greener side. It can be something as simple as planting more marsh gardens, strengthening the marsh that's already present on that property on the shoreline. You can add do bank grading if the bank is not a stable bank. You can lay that bank back, make it more stable and allow vegetation to hold the bank. As you move over to the gray area, you get into more of a hybrid situation. Columns, it's sills, S-I-L-L-S. That's a structure that runs parallel to the shore. It can be made out of a variety of things. This I think shows rock. And then behind that, you bring in sand and plant marsh grass. So that's a hybrid living shoreline. And then the further you move to the right, you get a little more engineered stone structures in there. It's higher wave minerals. So like breakwaters, those can still be living shorelines if you're planting grass on the beach behind the breakwater. Then you get revetments and bulkheads. That's the continuum.
Thank you. Can we ask questions?
Yeah.
So as I look at this, and in the green area, it's less green, it's to the right, so we're in the gray area. There are newer technologies out there that have all of the characteristics, well, not all of them, but most of the characteristics of a living shoreline. They create green space, bring grasses, place for critters, but yet they don't qualify for as a living shoreline as far as funding or any of the grants. Somehow we need to overcome that. At the cost of a living shoreline, what is it, $650 on that linear foot?
It depends.
It depends, but I think that's the average, and where property owners are looking to do the right thing, but can't necessarily afford 100% living shoreline. So somewhere in that quasi area, we need to find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And then we're looking at possibly creating a B&B clearinghouse, not a B&B clearinghouse, but clearinghouse somewhere to be able to look at these. But
couple things on that. I would say that I know VIMS and some other partners are looking at some of those technologies and trying to do that. Data assessment on its effectiveness of shoreline edge. So what you're talking about, clearinghouse and different options and other things. One thing I think we all need to remember is that the term living shoreline, it has a whole bunch of different definitions. We have the statutory definition that the General Assembly has provided us. We have the interpretation of that statute in VMRC's tidal wetlands guidance. And then we also have various definitions that are provided by a whole group of scientists and researchers, right? And then we have definitions provided by all these different cost share programs. So exactly, they're all kind of different and little tweaks in there. And so I think you're right, there's a challenge on the end game to get more living shorelines implemented and how we get that together.
And I think you hit the nail on the head when it's interpreted on the back end of the scientists and so forth. And with the General Assembly's on BMRC, it's not coming together like it should. Thank you.
Yeah, next slide. Again, just as a reminder, living shorelines provide a whole bunch of positive co-benefits or ecosystem services. If they're done right, they provide wildlife habitat, they
provide that coastal resilience if they're put in right. So it's a good slide from NOAA that kind of captures most of those co-benefits. So living shorelines themselves are a spectrum, right? So there's not one living shoreline, there's a whole bunch, and they provide a whole bunch of benefits. Next slide.
I think next slide, I'm gonna be back with you if somebody's trying to access the meeting.
So I'm just gonna run through these real fast, again, just to keep us on the same picture. Here's a living shoreline. There's an osprey pole. This one shows a sill, and then the grass that was planted behind it, and a sloped bank, graded bank. So that's kind of the whole process there of the living shoreline. Next slide. This is a one. See, there's an osprey pole right in the middle. That's just point of references before any work was done on this shoreline. This is at Old Springs Farm on the Potomac. So here it is implemented. You can see it's all grown in. There's a rock sill that you can't see. The grass is all grown in. There's that osprey pole as a point of reference. Next slide. Here's Westmoreland State Park, the breakwaters. They've been there for many years. They planted grass in the middle of the beach, so that is a living shoreline. It's a larger wave energy. And so this would come far right into that continuum that we looked at for a living shoreline. Next slide. That one. These are breakwaters that were just recently installed at Belle Isle State Park in the Rappahannock. These were funded by VDOT on state park property, out by the visitor center. And so you can see, hopefully you can see there's 8 or 9 breakwaters. Those are a little different than the ones at Westmoreland because they're closer into the bank. They're closer together, but they're still a living shoreline. They have a lot of marsh grass there. Next slide. It's down Mosquito Point on the Rappahannock, of course, and here's a before work situation, and you can see there's this curved beach was kept eroding back. And this was a good project that we like to highlight. There's really 4 landowners that worked together, so it wasn't one parcel, it wasn't one property. And the next slide, you can see that they installed a series of breakwaters. 3 of them are really clear. There's a 4th one that comes off the edge there, and they backfill with sand. This is a winter photo, so you really can't see the new marsh grass, but they planted the heck out of that beach with marsh grass. Friends of Rappahannock were involved with that planting and some of their funds and expertise on planting those things. Next slide. Here's a little shoreline at VCAP. We already mentioned that a little bit a minute ago. Virginia Conservation Assistance Fund that was funded on the northern neck. So this I'm not sure if this was in the Rappahannock or in the Potomac, but northern neck, and you can see that they put a rock sill, brought in sand, and planted down the marsh grass. So that was VCAP from this project. Next slide. All right, so just some bullets to think that our living shorelines, to get them to do what we want them to do, we need to maximize. Minimize that wave energy that's coming to that shoreline. We're going to increase holding on to sediment with that marsh grass. And we want to provide a way for that marsh grass to retreat up as sea level changes. And then, of course, there's a lot of maintenance issues. And so when we talk about financial incentive programs, maintenance of those big shorelines comes up. So still this slide from Ben's presentation. Next slide. So we all know that there's a lot of policy directives that kind of are driving living shorelines right now in Virginia. You can go ahead and put through 2 or 3 more. We know that the regulations just changed recently, a year or 2 ago, and BMRC has implemented those, making living shorelines used to be simply the preferred option. They're now the de facto permitting option, and only scientifically not feasible in another type of shoreline management strategy like a revetment or bulkhead permitted. We of course know the watershed implementation plan from Chesapeake Bay is driving that. There are goals in that for living shorelines. Of course, things like the coastal resiliency master plan that already mentioned. Next slide. So there's a whole host of financial incentive programs out there for living shorelines. The Commonwealth, we have done a lot, put in place a lot of policies and programs to help property owners get those living shorelines in place. Through BMRC, there's general permits. That's essentially just a streamlined and cheaper permitting option. It's a streamlined process, so that's an incentive. There are low interest loans for residential properties and other places. Middle Peninsula PDC has been a stellar star in utilizing that program, and they've taken over $500,000 in grant funds from DEQ and passed it down to their constituents to build living shorelines. We have cost share that's available on residential property. Virginia Conservation Assistance Program through our local stormwater conservation districts is the primary driver of that, but other areas like the James River, there's a couple of other cost share programs on residential property. Agricultural property, cropland and forest land can also get cost share to implement living shorelines, and that's through DCR, our agricultural cost share program. So, you know, somebody has funded so well. In the past, there are also tax credits to that same program on agricultural property. They implement living shoreline. Then there's some property tax exemptions that were passed several years ago for living shorelines. So a whole bunch of programs in place. And so one might think, well, we've got all these programs in place. How well are we? How well have we done? Getting our living shorelines on the ground. Next slide. Next one. So to talk about how well we are, let's look at the Chesapeake Bay WIP. So when it was released, it has a whole host. We all know there's a whole host of DMPs for a whole host of sources of pollution in there, but there are basic level goals for shoreline management. And when I say shoreline management, from the WIP perspective, that's pretty much that entire continuum. So it's not just living shorelines, but it does include living shorelines. So there's nearly 500,000 linear feet of new shoreline management that needed to be implemented from 2008 when we started counting up to 2025. So that's our goal. Next slide. You know, the WIP also has narrative goals. If you're not aware, there's several narrative goals that we're making for those shorelines. They're about working on native plant nurseries. There's been a lot of discussion in the last few months about the need for more nurseries in the northern Nashville Peninsula and Hampton Roads to help accommodate the volume of expected living shorelines, the amount of marsh grass that's going to need to be purchased from nurseries to install, and if the existing nurseries that exist aren't going to be able to provide enough seed stock. And so there's been actually a lot of discussion about that in the last few months. Next slide. So how do we get to that WIP goal? How do we count it? We at its most basic, we look at the length of the shoreline, how high that bank is, and what that erosion rate is, and that'll give us our pollutant load reduction. And so DCR, we've looked at that for the last 4 or 5 years. Next slide. We have reported over 1,400 sites for shoreline management to the WIP, to DEQ and EPA for the WIP goals. That's, you know, over 55 miles of shoreline. So you can see that's 292,000 feet of our 500,000 foot goal. And of those, that's, you know, near over 15 acres of new marsh grass that's been planted on living shorelines. Next slide breaks it out. Yeah, there we go. That breaks it out. Basin. And so you can see that from the WIP's perspective, which includes living shorelines, but is not exclusive to living shorelines. You can see we're at 59% of the goal in the Rappahannock and 58% of the goal statewide for shoreline management. The number there that's in the Rappahannock at 78,000 feet of shoreline management, about a third of that, there we go, 28%. So almost a third of that is living shoreline. So when we looked at these 1,400 sites, there are a lot of sites, you know, from 2008, 9, 10, 11, that, you know, living shorelines weren't as promoted back then, right? So some of those financial incentive programs had come along. So there's a lot of revetments still. So probably about 2/3 of those sites account for that 78,000 feet in Rappahannock are revetments. And about a third of that is living shoreline. About 90% of what's in the Rappahannock is also on residential sites. 3 counties that we've seen over 90% of that linear feet is in Lancaster, Northumberland, and Middlesex counties in the Rappahannock. So that's where we've documented most of that shoreline work. All right, so next slide. Let's talk about a grant we recently got. So back in, well, over a year and a half ago, we applied for a grant from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We didn't get it, so we applied a second time the year after that, and we did get awarded this grant. We awarded it in June of this year. It's a 3-year grant, $1 million. Provided $2 million in match. That's overmatched really to help elevate our project in NIFWIF's scoring criteria. And it's funded through EPA and NIFWIF's Innovative Nutrient Sediment Reduction Grant. So it's a 3-year grant through June 2024. We've got $1 million to do some work. So how are we going to get to that work goal? How are we going to accelerate living shoreline implementation? Next slide. So we've got 4 objectives on this project. We want to grow and enhance all the partnerships that are working on living shorelines. There's a lot of work being done in rural coastal Virginia, in the Rappahannock, Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck, Shore, Peninsula PC, Northern Neck PC, Soil Conservation District, Rappahannock. There's a lot of work being done. We want to use this grant to help us grow that partnership and kind of develop a strategic plan, if you will. We want to develop a cache of shovel-ready living shoreline projects. We want to do the designs on it. We found that that has been a barrier to some of these financial incentive programs, grant programs, that they want shovel-ready projects, and people aren't there. They still need to do the design. And so NIFWIF is going to let us do some of that design work up front. The grant also has money to actually build some new living shorelines on socially vulnerable sites. And then the last one is to continue doing that documentation that I spent a few minutes on that. Next slide. So rural coastal Virginia, that's where the focus of our grant is. Northern Neck, Middle Peninsula, Shore. Next slide. We've got about 50,000 on that partnership development piece. We really want to just put some ideas down on paper about how we're going to get to that goal in 2025 when we have 4 or so years to get there. Next slide. Next bullet. There we go. Quite a few topics that have come up over the past couple of years on what the partners that have been working on living shorelines. These topics have been discussed, but we really haven't come to a resolution or any type of strategic plan on how we might achieve some of these things. We want to write those down for the partners and get some concerted directed action. Next slide. We don't want to work, we don't want to create a new committee or anything. We just want to work with the existing watershed roundtables. Presented to all these folks back in the summer to get this kicked off. Our shoreline conservation districts and our PDCs are critical partners for us in this project. Next slide. The field verification I was talking about earlier, continuing to document shoreline sites. There's hundreds of sites that we haven't documented. We know that the permits exist through VMRC data, permit records, but we haven't verified or documented. So VMRC doesn't do compliance inspections on many of the local wetland board only permits. And so there's a lot of permits out there that need to be verified that they were in fact put in place by those homeowners, property owners. And so we're going to verify some of those. We're going to do that on the water. That's the easiest way for us. Continue to work with some of our other partners using their boats, and we're also using a boat beyond the water and look at this several hundred sites next couple of years. Next slide. So these engineering designs, we have funding to work with Scott Hardaway at PIMS to do 12 or so designs. This is going to be that cache shovel-ready projects. And we don't want to step on the feet of other programs. And so we kind of envision this funding being spent on projects that are larger, maybe multiple parcels instead of just one single landowner. Maybe other priority sites like state parks, management areas, of course, these socially vulnerable residential areas. That's a priority for this particular grant. And then once these designs are done, the appropriate partners can work through other funding mechanisms for the construction dollars. And so give other partners a chance to move forward with that shovel-ready project. Next slide. So the bulk of our money, like I said, we had $1 million through the grant, 625,000 for construction. So a couple of those designs that Scott will do for us, we need to have done on socially vulnerable residential areas. And we have funding here to put those in place on those sites. Those are the goals from the scope of work of the grant. Again, like I said earlier, it's kind of envisioning multiple parcels, multiple landowners in higher medium wave energy environments. Next slide. So you might wonder what's socially vulnerable. A couple slides here. We left that vague in the grant. There's lots of different entities out there that have websites and data analysis. NIFWIP has their own. Next couple of bullets. Several websites. DAFPA has some social vulnerability analysis. But then if you click to the next slide, you know, the one more. Post-resiliency master plan that was just put out and just released yesterday officially. It's got some really good data analysis on, you know, coastal flood hazards and that social vulnerability. And so, working with partners on the project, we've identified a preliminary list of sites where we could do these designs, and then we're going to try to utilize this data analysis that's been done for this master plan and just assess that social vulnerability so that then we can make decisions on where we do those designs and where we spend that construction. And really, goal is to get us to that level. Like I said, I think we're nearly 60% of the right hand, so I think it's achievable. I think all the partners can get there, but a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Can you go back to the slide that, you know, and how you're going to be working with the rural coastal region?
The map or list of partners?
It was the, well, actually, what your objectives are.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which slide was that?
Here's the, you know, going.
Slide 40.
More. Is it partial?
That one? Yeah.
Yeah, not the map, but actually the goals.
Go forward.
Yeah, go forward more.
Two slides. Down the bottom.
Well, appreciate you looking at the, yeah, you know, the wide scale utilization is, you know, that is a challenge, but I look at, appreciate the congratulations on this grant, and trying to, you know, move that partnership forward. But we also have that pocket money in the community preparedness fund that is kind of challenging, I think, at this point with the dollars and the way they're allocated. I think in the first round, I think it's, well, 15 million is available, but only a fraction of that, only I think 50% of it was awarded. So I guess that carries over. But part of the certain percentage of the dollars go into planning, design, can go into planning. Certain percentage go into construction, then a certain percentage go into low income areas. But it seems that everything that was awarded in that first stage was only planning. And held up in the process, and the 40 applications were submitted in the peninsula home. Held up because they wanted a community-wide scale. So the preference is going to the urban areas versus the rural areas, and most of that was actually planned. So it's in looking at the law and the intent of the law, not necessarily the involvement they're supposed to. But, so I know there are 2 more rounds, so I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen with this. But it's a challenge to work this kinks out.
Yeah, with any grant program that's there, and you know, do I have to preface that that's a different division? That's not.
Yeah,
we're not.
that's
I'm not
not
involved in that in any way.
Well, I appreciate
what's publicly available, but
that's just a concern. And but with this this actually working with this grant and establishing that partnership can enhance that, give them the tools to be able to work better. I think that's what the goal ultimately should be, how to utilize those funds more effectively in those regions.
And, you know, the Middle Peninsula PDC, like I was saying, with the loan program and your leadership in that, exactly, it's in quite a few applications now.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Next up, we have the number 6, the wastewater infrastructure policy working group. Lance.
Give me a second, Lance, to get it working.
Thank you for inviting me. My name is Lance Berger. I'm the director for the Department of Health Division of Food and Water Services. And I wanted to talk to you about a couple of items that fall under Senate Bill 1396 in this past legislative session from 2021. And included in that is the wastewater infrastructure work. So next slide. So a couple of components to this bill. It's wrapped together a lot of work that was done jointly between Department of Health, DEQ, EHCD, and the Virginia Resource Authority, along with pulling together a lot of stakeholders and getting input. And so we came up with 4 different items under this legislation. The first of those being the Commonwealth policy to prioritize access to the wastewater treatment system that is protected with public health. The next was the wastewater infrastructure workers, and then looking at the food handling and disposal regulations and incorporating impacts of climate change into those regulations. And then lastly, allowing for grants and loans from DDH's indemnification. So starting with the Commonwealth policy, so what this legislation established is that it's now policy of Commonwealth to prioritize universal access to wastewater treatment that protects public health and the environment and supports local economic growth and stability. So I think this is a really important component of this legislation because it notes the connection between wastewater infrastructure, public health, the environment, and the economy. When you think about, as an example, Southwest Virginia, where they're looking at some of those rivers as scenic rivers that could be a tourist draw to that area, having the straight pipes and things like that removed are important, and it same goes for areas in the Rappahannock Basin, making sure that those are protected and can be a viable economic commodities for things like shelter. In order to accomplish that policy, the legislation talks about a couple of different aspects of how the various agencies that are involved should go about trying to accomplish that. One of those being improving public education regarding adequate wastewater treatment. So just as an example of how we're trying to incorporate that, the Virginia Realtors has a podcast that I participated in a couple months ago and for our Septic Smart outreach. And we talked about finding different ways to get information out there about wastewater treatment to homeowners, to the kids' K through 12 education, incorporating it into things like the Powerthon, just a lot of different ideas that are being thrown out of how we can improve that public education. Also, a very key component of accomplishing this policy is going to be collaboration and coordination of grants. So that one of the first things that the infrastructure work group did was put together a list of all of the available wastewater infrastructure grant funding that's out there through all of those various agencies, so that we could look at where there might be overlaps, where those funding opportunities come up. Some are open year round, some have different time frames. So trying to look at how can those grant funds be paired together or used in a more effective manner. And also looking for increasing funding where possible And I'll talk a little bit later about ARPA funding. I really appreciate, some of the numbers, attention to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Next slide. Three other items that fall under this Commonwealth policy is prioritizing, focusing, and innovating the use of funding. So again, not just understanding where the grant funds are and trying to collaborate, but finding new ways to use that funding. We've talked a lot with DHCD. A lot of times when you have a wastewater project failing on-site sewage system, as an example, a lot of times it's not just the system that's failing, the house may need repairs as well. So how can we partner up with things like community development block grants and not just address the wastewater issues for the owner, but also trying to address maybe issues with the owner. And so what we've, as an innovative way of trying to focus on that funding, we partnered with our local health departments and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, and they've created a tool where our local health departments can go in and geographically identify neighborhoods that are in need of wastewater infrastructure, and that there's a shovel-ready project, put that information into that tool so that when funding becomes available within an area, we can overlay our Rappahannock River Basin has X amount of dollars that are available. What are the projects that fall within that river basin that we know are already shovel ready based on the information on the ground from our local health? Working in the central office, I don't have that direct knowledge, and those local staff are the ones that really know where the issues are in their local community. We're also looking at ways to partner with other folks in local government to help us populate that data set. Another aspect of that Commonwealth policy is developing a preference for community-based or regional projects rather than the site-by-site solutions. So for the Department of Health, when we get a septic permit repair, we go out and we work with that owner. We're trying to find that owner an individual repair. And it's not very often that folks step back and think about the broader impact in the community, and maybe there's a better solution. And a really great example of that from Rappahannock River Basin is the Catholic Calvert project in Fauquier County, where it took a long time, a lot of effort, and it's also with monumental work to get that accomplished. But that's really where it's available, getting the most bang for the buck. It's certainly a great option. That's not to say that community systems are the best option everywhere. There's still plenty of places where an individual one-site repair is the best option, but at least stepping back and thinking about it a little bit before we put, especially grant funding in the ground, and not throwing good money away. And then the last part of this Commonwealth policy is integrating solutions across sewer and one site. I'm trying to break down those silos between my program with BDH, looking at the on-site food systems, and DEQ's program, looking at public sewer projects. And that again gets to that, what's the best solution for this community? Maybe it's a community on-site food system instead of a DEQ permitted system. Maybe it's individual septic, maybe it's big pipe. But getting us in the room and really starting to look across agencies and across programs at what the best solutions are. Next one. So the next component of the legislation project is with the wastewater infrastructure work group. So we previously had a work group that was formed through a joint agreement with the Secretary of Health, the Secretary of Natural Resources, and the Secretary of Commerce and Trade, but it was not a codified work group. And so what the legislation did was codify that work group and continued its work until at least 2030. And that work group is made up of representatives from the Department of Health, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Virginia Resource Authority. But on top of that, it also those are the ex officio members of the group. But it also, the legislation asks us to invite to participate in that group, the Virginia Association of Counties, Virginia Association of Planning Districts, U.S. Department of Agricultural Rural Development, our Virginia On-Site Wastewater Recycling Association, the Virginia Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies, Virginia Rural Water Association, and CERCAP. And we've also reached out to other groups. There's a lot of folks on the call that have participated and never heard that participated in these meetings as well. And so this work group has a number of different tasks. And kind of the primary tasks that we're working on right now are assessing the wastewater infrastructure needs in the Commonwealth. Just understanding, getting that picture of how much of a need do we have. We all know there's wastewater infrastructure. We know there's straight pipes. We know there's outdated treatment plants. But what is the actual dollar value? How much does that need statewide? Again, promoting public education and the importance of adequate wastewater treatment, encouraging that collaboration among agencies for grant and loan programs. Also, the endorsement of those community-based projects, finding a way to prioritize those grant fundings, and then again, looking at how can we move forward this agency or this Commonwealth policy of access to wastewater solutions. So to start the work, the work group met first in July, and then elected to do 3 roundtable meetings. We had 3 regional roundtables in September, one in the eastern part of the state, one in central, and one in the western part of the state, to get feedback from stakeholders on those various topics, how we could go about promoting public education, working together on our grant funding, and got a lot of really great feedback. Next slide, please. And so that information that we got from our stakeholders is going to be incorporated into a report to the General Assembly. The legislation, Senate Bill 1396, required the work group to submit a report annually to the governor and the General Assembly. And so our first one will be in December of this year, and we'll have another one December next year, and so on and so forth. And those reports are going to outline policy recommendations on promoting education, coordinating wastewater infrastructure funding, endorsing those community-based systems, and prioritizing innovative uses of state and federal funds. Look to see that coming out here very shortly. And that work group actually meets again this on the 17th of December. We're meeting at the Department of Health, but there's also a virtual component if you're interested in sitting in and listening. Next slide. So in addition to establishing the wastewater infrastructure work group, Senate Bill 1396 took a really critical step, my opinion, on wastewater infrastructure and multi-state systems, and providing DPH the ability to incorporate considerations for the impacts of climate change into our on-site sewage system regulations. And the reason why this is so important, I have just 2 photos here to try and share where this issue comes from. And many of you have seen this, I'm sure it's been presented here many times. But on the left, we have a permit that was issued by a local health department in 2002. And we had a number of different remote drain fields for this subdivision. And you probably can't see it too well there, but they met their minimum setbacks to shellfish borders. Everything was more than 70 feet away from shellfish borders. And so it fully complied with our regulations. We issue a permit. Fast forward to 2019, and those systems are in permit because of shoreline erosion and impacts of sea level rise in that area. So what we're looking to do next slide is to to develop some considerations for the impacts of climate change and incorporate those into our regulations. It's come to our attention, we're the first state in the nation to try and tackle this. So we've reached out to other state partners to see what types of ideas and things that they've had put out there. We had our first meeting of a subgroup to start addressing this issue last week. And this is going to be incorporated into a larger revision of our sewage handling and disposal regulations. They've not been updated since 2000, so they're 21 years old. So certainly time for that to be updated. And we're really open to any and all suggestions at this point. We know it's a very, there's a lot of different interests at play, and we want to make sure that we have everyone at the table and taking into consideration those thoughts. Had a lot of really great different various ideas that have been thrown out. And so we just encourage if anyone has interest in this, feel free to reach out to me. We'd be happy to keep you in the loop as those meetings occur. We anticipate having 5 or 6 meetings over the next 3 or 4 months with that subgroup to kind of build a draft framework, and then we will take that to our larger sewage handling and disposal advisory committee to help us with finalizing and crafting the language for that proposed regulation. That's all. The final component of the legislation from Senate Bill 1396 that I wanted to discuss with you is our indemnification fund. So VDH has a fund that $10 of every application for an on-site food system goes into this fund. And if your system fails within 3 years and it's due to negligence on the part of the health department, we'll pay for the repair of your system. As many of you may know, we've been transitioning to having more and more of that work, that design work being done by the private sector. On top of that, we've also done over the last 15 years, a lot of work with our local health departments to improve quality assurance. So we don't have a lot of folks coming and seeking funding from the indemnification fund for that reason. And so what the legislation allows us to do is kind of use that fund also for grants and loans for low-income households with moderate to low. And it's capped at 200% of federal poverty guidelines. And just as an example, for a family of 4, that would be about $53,000 a year. One of the things that we heard during the regional roundtables was maybe we should adjust this to area median income, 80% of AMI as opposed to 200% of federal poverty guidelines. I thought that was a really great suggestion. It's something that we will likely look to try and accomplish in the future. Again, owners that are eligible for the indemnification fund because their system fails and it's due to negligence on the part of the department, they still have first priority under this funding, so we can't expend all of these funds for grants and loans. But it does give us another tool. Some of the targets for initial funding that we talked about out of this fund would be things like minor repairs, like a septic tank collapse, with a relatively inexpensive repair, but it's also very important because it's a significant risk to the owner, especially if they have children, and maybe also some minor operation maintenance costs for alternative systems. So that's one option that we have for funding out there now. Next slide. And to help us with developing that fund, there was additional funding provided with Senate Bill 1396 to VDH to hire a wastewater infrastructure manager. And so that position is going to continue to coordinate with them on the various tools that they're working on for us to help us identify and quantify the wastewater infrastructure needs in the Commonwealth. Will also help us in implementing the new Commonwealth policy. And most importantly, is going to be tasked with developing this new indemnification fund grant loan program, assisting with wastewater infrastructure needs throughout the Commonwealth. He'll serve as our liaison to the wastewater infrastructure work group. And then at the same time, they'll also be seeking out different assistance opportunities that might be out there, things like Virginia Environmental Endowment Grant that we currently have, also Smithfield Foundation, similar types of projects. Next slide. And again, really want to say a thank you to the members of the General Assembly that are here today with the budget that was passed here recently with the American Recovery Plan Act. There was funding included in that for PDH to receive $11.5 million, 5.75 million in FY22, and then another 5.75 million in FY23 and 24 to assist property owners with well and septic improvements, and that would be for households that have below 200% federal poverty guidelines. So that's something this wastewater infrastructure position will be tasked with heading up our effort to spend those funds. We thought that position was going to have to go look for some funding, and then this is a really great opportunity. This is statewide availability of these funds. We've already started getting phone calls from homeowners that are interested, and so certainly looking forward to being able to help throughout the Commonwealth with septic involvement. One item I did, I apologize, I did skip over, with the wastewater infrastructure work group. I think this group may be aware of some work that the Virginia Institute of Marine Science has been doing, looking at septic failure hotspot analysis, where they took data from VDH and were able to create hotspots where we can kind of map out where funding is available. Thank you. Yes. This is just an example of it. So you can kind of see these different blocks here, and the redder the blocks, the hotter the hotspot. They also have some data layers of sewer lines and things like that. It can really help us to identify where we have grant funding, maybe where to target outreach, or if we have an area that we know is a hotspot and it also has public sewer available, okay, that's a good area to target for sewer connections as opposed to septic repairs. And so there was funding included in this legislation as well to allow for this work that BIMS has done to be expanded statewide. Currently, that mapping is only available east of 95, and so they're going to expand it for the rest of the state. But that is all I have. But happy to answer any questions that you have about the legislation or the ARPA program. So,
Any questions for Lance? Thank you. Appreciate the information. Next, we'll move on to Jeff Wallen, Rappahannock Institute Center for Natural Capital.
Thank everyone for inviting me today. This is a talk. It's a little bit different scale than the it's not necessarily about policy program. It's a product. So start it up here so I can actually see what I'm talking about. Okay, so I think everyone here is probably aware that the decline in indigenous fisheries throughout the Chesapeake has been a long-standing problem. It's something that many of the agencies in the state and the federal system have been putting a lot of effort into. Good, next slide. Can I do it? So the group that I've been helping out the Rappahannock community actually has moved their headquarters to Rappahannock, the old mill building in the village. That mill has been there for a long time. The dam itself was built back in the 1930s. The mill building has been empty empty and has not been serving as a mill for about 25 years now. So the dam itself is, it's a historic relic of the industrial age that is a big honking piece of concrete at the Mill River. The owners asked us to look at ways to deal with this over the long run. And after evaluating it, we resolved that probably the best possible outcome for it would be to have it removed. As has been done with lots of dams all throughout the Chesapeake Bay. So everybody's probably familiar with shad and herring, eels, and stripers, right? So the rockfish, rockfish stripers have been caught all the way up to the Basin Dam. So, you know, after the entry dam removal, or to retake some of that habitat, and they worked their way up the watershed now to, well, in many cases, all the way up to the headwaters. This particular slide is one that was prepared by the Smithsonian out of their Edgewater group. The Smithsonian has been doing analysis of the availability of habitat for indigenous fish, and they've identified all of the impediments in the watershed. They're indicated by, probably hard to see, but little blue dots on the screen there. The thing that sticks out here is the big red blob off on the left. That's the Rappahannock Mill. Let's go to the next slide. This is another one by a student at working at Smithsonian, and this is a graph of the water temperature in the entire watershed and how suitable it is for river. So the farther you get west, the warmer the water gets on average. So there's fewer days that the tighter window the herring can use that habitat. And in particular, there's problems in the southern part and western part of the Rappahannock part of the watershed. Let's go to the next slide. So this project is intended to accomplish a couple of different things. Certainly the diagamous fish. Everybody knows there's diagamous fish, which can be either catch-adrenous or anadrenous, right? So eels breed out in the ocean and go up during their life cycle. All these other species are breeding in our watershed and going out to the ocean. There's also a lot of other resident fisheries that are involved. There's this ecological connection thing. There's a genetic diversity and aquatic connectivity issue. The one thing that's not listed up here is the economic impact too, because some of these fish are some of the largest economic drivers of fisheries in Chesapeake Bay for generations. So these dams and other changes in habitat basically reduce their numbers down to the point where they weren't economically important. The exception to that, of course, is the rockfish population. Rockfish fishery is a very large economic asset. This particular dam, there's a privatization exercise that was conducted a few years back by the Nation Service with funding from EPA and from the other government. They went through and mapped every single impediment dam throughout the entire Chesapeake Bay, and then they ranked them by the amount of habitat that impediment blocked. there were some other things they rolled up into that exercise. Well, the little old Rappahannock Mill Dam, now that number 4 on the list for the entire Chesapeake Bay. Mostly because of the very, very large number of river miles that are. The other big dams that you see on that list are like the Rappahannock Dam, which is pretty unlikely that that's going anywhere anytime soon. It's one of the largest hydroelectric dams in the East Coast. The Washer Dam down at Richmond, which is probably well aware of. There's another one in Rappahannock called Grass, and then Rappahannock. So it's a huge priority from all of the, the community of people that work on fish impediments and dams fisheries. It's surprisingly well known throughout the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, so let's move on to more fine scale stuff. Can you get the next one? All right, so two things on this side. One is on the left side is this list of bulleted goals, which you kind of expect to see here. So restoring economic community, improve water quality, and all this. What I really wanted to show you though is this is the satellite view of the Rapidan village on the far right. You can almost, I hope you can see that where the road crosses the river. And then this, the red part of the river is where we have actually gotten out on the river, and we think that indicates the size of the actual pool behind the mill. So it's an extremely long, extremely thin lake, essentially. And so when the dam is dewatered, or the pool is dewatered, all of that area on the river would be impacted by it. And what we'll have to do is then do some restoration work, tree planting work, adding some large woody debris in there to provide some habitat variability. There's lots of different techniques that go into that. So the thing that has become, and this has been done lots of places all over the U.S. And there's lots of dams, old dams that have outlived their useful life and are now being removed in some way, modified in some way to improve fish habitat. So go one more slide there. So you get a mental picture of this, right? What's it going to look like with what everybody has, right? Well, if you're canoeing down the Rappahannock, what it looks like now is the one on the left. Once the water's drawn down from the old dam, it'll look a lot more like this on the right. And that's a picture actually from just not too far. So there'll be a lot more vegetation and smaller river bottom. There'll be a small floodplain on the other side, and a lot more habitat features actually in the river, whereas right now it's just a kind of fish. One more slide, please, Ellen. This is just a real quick look at some of the data that the Department of Wildlife Resources collected for it. It's water depths behind the dam. So you can see that when you get down towards the dam, and the numbers you're seeing there are 13, 9, 10, 7, 8, 10, 11. As you go farther upstream to the left, it becomes shallower. So you're down to 6, 4, 3, but it's still 3 feet on average across the river, quite a ways farther up. All right. Okay, so the restoration approach is is prescribed and the techniques are pretty much prescribed and have been done in these other projects where you institute some baseline monitoring. So there's a tremendous amount of data collection that goes into the pre-project work. So the engineering description of the size, depth, the water speed, and all that stuff is measured in great detail. There's a dewatering step. In this particular case, the dam actually has a dewatering mechanism on it, which is relatively unusual. There's flashboard risers on one side, so you can have to pull these 12 by 12-inch timbers out of the dam to intentionally dewater it. Bank and bed restoration, vegetation, floodplain restoration, on the woods. So what we've done so far is we're about 18 months into this project, which typically takes 4 to 5 years. Nothing moves very fast. We've done an initial review of historic resources. We've done some, thanks to our partners at the Department of Wildlife Resources, some electroshocking sampling below the dam. We've done a couple of sediment samples to get pre-data above the dam so that they can use that to design the actual sediment study that we go on there's been some visual survey work on channel morphology and the little streams that come into the pool. And then also the Smithsonian has done this it's called the eDNA. Basically, it's a technique that they use to take water samples and then they check in the water sample itself for DNA part of the species that they're trying to find. So they found river herring DNA at the base of the dam. We haven't found any herring. We found herring. How's herring put DNA in the water, right? Well, they excrete it. We've also got water temperature for our showing in one graph. So that's kind of where we're at for the moment. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the interesting to me, anyway, interesting and I think relatively innovative thing that's come out of this is actually the finance side of things. So this, these are expensive projects, right? That I've gotten, very qualified professionals telling me it should be around $1 million for this process. And equally qualified professionals tell me, oh, it's going to be $4 million. So I'm guessing somewhere in between. The thing that has come up just in the last several months is an offer from a private group to finance the entire project. So they have the ability to establish a mitigation bank at the bank. And that's a new option within the mitigation banking world. The Corps of Engineers and the other agencies that have been involved in this work for decades. Very recently promulgated some guidance that said you can use dam removal as a ecological restoration technique for mitigation banking events. So we have a group that has offered to finance the entire project from stem to stern, conditional upon approval by the interagency review team, which is the IRT, so use that acronym. If the IRT approves this, then they'll come in and finance the whole thing. And they have experience doing this, not in Virginia, but in other states. And they have hired people that are, I think, eminently qualified, as many as they have, as well as I can find in the country, to provide guidance to them. Okay, so that's plan A. Plan, every one of these things I develop fish farm. No, I've always got plan B, usually a plan C, plan D too, but the plan B in this case is, there are a number of federal competitive grants that can fund these kinds of things. Our partners over at Fish and Wildlife Service have already put in, a request for financing to help the, pay for all the stuff, if the mitigation banking strategy fails for some reason. We're expected to, but. Okay, so I'm gonna jump. So the team that we put together is two private companies. One's based in Maryland and one is actually national. Their this particular office at Kelly Norman is based in Baltimore. Each town is out of Forest Hill, Maryland. They're a Signville company. They've done lots of times and they do it extremely well. They're very well-known player in this space. Plan that we have going forward in 2022 is Kimmy Warren is going to be working on sediment, all that volume location constituents, all the sort of sediment volumes required. Mussels are a concern because there are endangered mussels that occur above and below the dam. So a mussel habitat, a mussel population survey is going to be conducted by Virginia Tech in the spring. The eDNA work is going to continue by through the Smithsonian. They've already committed to doing that. We'll have school morphology in essentially an engineering scale study done by Kimmy Warren, and then historic resources is another thing that has to be addressed. So sort of resources so to take care of that. Okay, and Ellen will wind us up and then I'll take some questions. We're in the planning phase, so there's a deconstruction plan, a sediment transport plan, impacts to the railroad bridge upstream, the PDOT bridge downstream. We have to, come up with a plan for how to mitigate any potential impacts there. Revegetation plan, long-term stewardship. There's a 7 to 10 year monitoring program required. Resources. And then last but not least, we as a nonprofit are very interested in incorporating an education program. Some of these other watersheds have actually done shed in the classroom. And right now, the Friends of Rappahannock does a workshop in the classroom. We're just starting that discussion, but I hope that we'll be able to merge the two. And then we'll be able to reach out to some of the local school systems. And then lastly, the research program is, I said they're going to do muscle work, but also there's a lack of a lab capacity in Virginia to do this DNA work. And relatively important in a lot of ways. So we're talking to Virginia Tech about how they might establish a DNA lab. And then, of course, work with some centers. They've been stellar at jumping in early. I think that's the last slide of substance. So I would be happy to take questions if anybody has any, and I can say after the meeting is concluded as well.
Any members have any questions for Jeff? Thank you.
Good question. The credits you're talking about through a mitigation bank, would that be stream restoration credits?
Yes. So yes, it's probably going to be both. Actually, there'll be a wetland. They do things either acres or feet, right? So there'll be some acres because of the thinning of the beds of the river, but there'll be a lot of stream feet. So Yeah, it's got, it's like any other federal program, and not to discourage our federal colleagues, but it's got to fit in the box, right? I mean, you can't, they're not gonna come up with anything new. So it's got to fit within the parameters.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Last up, number 8, Rappahannock River Roundtable update. Brent?
I'm very glad to give a little update on the Rappahannock River Roundtable for you today. Brian Hoffman said the north. He has been busy fixing areas on the house. Sorry, I can't be here today. So the Rappahannock River Roundtable is a strategic partnership that's been created in the last few years of stakeholders from the headwaters to the Chesapeake Bay, dedicated to land and water conservation, community outreach, education, and capacity building. Very often we work with stakeholders in the roundtable to help with funding and kind of resources. And so it's really a way that all the stakeholders within the partnership can share resources and information, as well as figure out what works, what does not work, and how we all like moving forward in the future. First, really quickly, give you a little update on river access. We've had a lot of success especially in the upper part of the watershed, where there's large voids of any type of public access, especially for kayak access. So Riverside Preserve here, Riverside Preserve is near Warrenton. That is complete and open to the public. It's a beautiful view slide that has been used. Remington is complete and open to the public as well. That is as of this year. Rogers Ford, which is at Wildlife Phelps Wildlife Management Area, is open as well. That'll be a grand opening in 2022. The important part about these is that it is now broken up places where it makes it possible for folks to have day trips on the upper part of the river when it never really used to be able to have folks come out to the river and enjoy certain sections of the upper part of the Rappahannock River. Rappahannock River campgrounds have been for sale for a while. DGIF had been thinking about getting involved with that, making that a public put in, but it is now private and now open for business under new ownership. Lakota, there's planning and discussions, and then Fauquier Springs, that's near a golf course, and there's planning and discussions underway to try and create public access points there as well. And then the Upper Rappahannock River Water Trail, working with Jeff, obviously, with dam removal, as well as creating this series of sites on the Upper Rappahannock as well. Currently on the Lower Rappahannock, at Lands and Wildlife Management Area in George, we are in the very, very, very early stages of working with DGIF or even asking the question of why it would not be possible to put in a canoe and kayak lane there to have access to a very large stretch of the river below Port Royal, or frankly, there's very little public access as well, so they could put in that area that's around Port Vega and the Anzac buildings. And that is on state land there. There are some covenants within how that land can be used with wildlife management area that might impact that. We'll know more toward later spring. Oyster restoration updates. So out of the goals outlines in phase 3 is 145 acres of oyster reef restored. Involves, as you know, converting salt bottom substrate to hardened river bottom for the recruitment of oysters and the installation of that baby oyster that spat on the show. Roundtable partners currently hold about 110 acres of privately leased river bottom, which has been reserved and committed to restoration efforts. Some of those sites are located in a brand new place in Meacham Creek, which is by Grace Point campgrounds in Middlesex County, as well as Carter. We continue to do work with partners in Carter's Creek, Urbana Creek, and then the main stem of the Rappahannock River. Our 2020 goal, 2022 goal is to restore 10 acres of oyster reef habitat with local partners. That is basically our local seafood dealers as well as other contractors to help us with they have the capacity to put those literally hundreds of thousands of bushels of shell on those reefs and to put the spout on shell as well. We will also begin to have a monitoring program to look at reefs that we've installed over the last few years, to be able to see exactly what is growing there or where other areas where we may need to add shell as well. Our coastal forestry update, don't let the coastal forest name deceive you. That is our official name for our forestry programs. Watershed wide, through all of the partners with the roundtable. There have been 18 reforestation projects being installed in the fall and winter of 2021. You can see those funders there, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Department of Forestry, the Agricultural Cost Share Program, Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund, and Arbor Day Foundation. So all combined with all the partners, the roundtable has planted about 75,000 trees in 2021, and the goal is to add 100,000 or more as in 2022 as we get towards our 2025 goals. And that is repairing buffers, afforestation, and then tree. One of the kind of a very neat thing that is undergoing, and the contract was just signed to Friends of the Rappahannock is working with roundtable partners on something called the Rappahannock Conservation Nursery, and that is a partnership that just signed with Culpeper County as well as Cooperative Extension DOF to found a nursery in Culpeper County to support tree planting projects for roundtable partners throughout the watershed, from the mountains to the bay. The trees will be propagated and grown, some from seed, some from trees, frankly, that are not used from tree giveaways. We will grow them out so that they can be planted in parks. Parks require a larger grade of tree versus riparian buffers require some very smaller material because you're planting hundreds of thousands of them at a time. So these will be offered wholesale or at no cost or donated to park the project. And just recently, just last week or 2 weeks ago, the latest round of Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund grants were approved. And so we had, this is in the Rappahannock watershed, we have John Marshall Stormwater Conservation District, given $3,980 for a 5-acre restoration project, Fauquier County. Northumberland County Public Schools were funded to send 60 middle school students on a 2-night, 3-day overnight trip to Port Isabel with Chesapeake Bay Foundation. That is Smith Island. They have a center right across from Smith Island. So that we were very happy to see that those kids would be able to go out and see the bay hands-on for multiple days at a time. As well as some oyster outreach for Tidewater oyster gardeners. Thomas Jefferson had some soil health activities with kids, basically which will relate, show the kids the relationship between soil health and healthy watersheds. Soil water conservation districts and Envirothon support. The Envirothon is a kind of environmental competition at the high school level that every year CBR supports. Clean Virginia Waterways, litter cleanup program support. We benefit, the roundtable benefits from those grants for their cleanup every year, as well as Isaac Walton Week for the creek critters and softball programs. Gaelic Country Day School received a good chunk of money for their brand new Gaelic outdoors program that they are creating, as well as Friends of the Rappahannock received money for their ongoing tree buffer plantings and bait and oyster shell as well. Next, and then finally, we've heard a little bit today about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which is a statewide fund that provides funding to help communities deal with flooding issues, whether it's from the mountains all the way to Chesapeake Bay. A little bit of background on this is funded through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It receives 45% of all the proceeds from those auctions. There's funding for capacity building and planning, and then actual installation of physical projects. Localities must have a resilience mitigation plan approved by DCR to apply for funding. So I do know that various counties within the watershed are in various stages of having those resilience plans created and then approved by DCR. It's very much so in flux about where counties are. The requirement, though, is that localities must have that approved mitigation plan to apply for those funds. So it behooves localities to have these resilience mitigation plans created and approved by DCR as fast as possible, so that localities can start to apply for funds as much as they would like. Basically, the second round of grant funding closed on November 5th. The third round will be created and open on January 6th and closes on April 8th. The first round gave out $7 million, as was alluded to earlier, $7 million out of $15 million that was asked for. So there was some basically they were not all funded, but they were not denied many of the applications. They had the opportunity to have feedback from DCR to reapply in that second grant round. Currently, up to $102 million are sitting in the CF. Yeah, currently to be given out. So there's quite a bit of money to do. The only application that was funded in the Rappahannock watershed from the first grant round, they have not announced the awards from the second grant round yet. Was the Middle Peninsula Planning District, was for $26,400 for the permitting and design of the Carlton boat ramp and wake. In a nutshell, they're having big issues with shoaling of that boat ramp, and so they are working with a private landowner to try and figure out a solution so that they continue to keep that boat ramp open over time. Because what's going on now is the way they're managing it, and the way it's shoaling it is not sustainable. Finally, the roundtable has applied for a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant for $1 million for their innovative and nutrient sediment production for this coming round. I believe this one will actually focus. The last one applied for was focused on the upper part of the watershed. This one will focus on the lower part of the watershed to work with partners for here, the Healthy Watershed Forest Initiative, support your agricultural cost share and your DCAP programs to deal with some stormwater and agricultural runoff, expands revolving loan program for best management practices, and finally to provide those resources and technical assistance to your local government staff. That is kind of the update at this time. Like I said, glad to be here. Very much so. Enjoy working with you all, and look forward to working with you all in the future. Glad to take a question.
Thanks, Brandon. Are there any questions? Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of the agenda. Next up, Elvin, future meeting dates and identification of other items for a March meeting.
Yeah, you see the meeting schedule for 2022. We're working with the city of Fredericksburg on a location that's hopefully downtown, close to the riverfront, so we can, the weather cooperates, take a little field visit to the sites that we saw some information on several meetings ago. And then the June meeting, Lancaster County, sorry, wasn't in Pennsylvania. We hope to coordinate that with Tides In to see the work that we also heard about that they've done on shoreline restoration. And then that will move us back up to the upper basin in September. And then back here, unless there's objection, I think this has turned out to be the annual December meeting site. And I tentatively reserve it for next year to repeat what we've done. And potential agenda items. I think obviously we've got March meeting is our organizational meeting. We will have at least 5 new members. And we will be coming out of a General Assembly session that will be dealing with the biennial budget. And so there may be some things to talk about there. Frankly, I have a question for the legislators who are on the line and here in the room. You've got a redistricting vote to come up at some point when the Supreme Court sends you something. Oh, does it just stay? So
whatever they pick is it.
okay. Then
We had our chance already.
okay. So I guess my question is, once
Another round of elections.
well, I wasn't going to go there. Where I'm going is that redistricting plan will likely impact the legislative membership of this commission. And we may need a bill to amend that statute that identifies what districts are members. Do you, I'm looking at senior member of the Senate, do you agree?
Yes, except we won't be elected in those districts in the Senate for 2 more years.
So we can deal with that in 23.
Right. So as an example, if I were to get a district that didn't include the counties east of the mountains, I would still be representing the areas over here. I just might have less interest in it. You want to say that? Yeah. No, I would still be interested. Yeah.
I'm going to look to, we got several legislators on the line if they want to weigh in. Do you feel we need a bill this year, or we could just wait till 23, excuse me.
What would your bill do?
There's part of our statute specifically identifies the legislative districts
I got you.
that are members of the commission.
I thought it was generic in terms of
No.
districts that are part of this watershed.
No, if you remember Leo Woodruff's effort to standardize how these things are done, we were fit into that model back in those days.
Yeah, so if I can just give some pinpoint, I think by the end of the year, early next year, we're gonna know what the districts are going to be. I guess it would just depend on if anyone wants to carry that piece of legislation for this session, because that's a thin timeline to get it turned in before the deadline for filing. But I think definitely by the 2023 session, we will know what districts will be a part in this area, and then you probably would want to do an amendment to that to change it so it can reflect for the next 2 years what legislative districts are going to be a part of it.
It has no impact on the localities.
Okay.
Yeah. Certainly something else to be addressed in the future for sure.
Okay.
I think it looks like based on the timing, probably in 2023 would be the correct timing within the county.
Okay, well, that's future agenda item.
Yes.
And unless somebody else here feels differently, then the way I will proceed is working with the assembly. We'll deal with that issue in advance of the 2023 General Assembly session.
Since this is our last meeting before the General Assembly, is there any major issues that are going before the General Assembly that are going to affect perhaps what we do? Have you known at this point, or
I'm going to look to our members here.
for a preview of anything or anything you know about?
I think the budget is going to be the big thing. You've got some significant natural resource funding items that are in the current biennial budget. What will happen going forward with those items? We've got some major progress that's going to have to continue to be made towards the Chesapeake Bay WIP, and the anticipation is a significant commitment on the wastewater side, on the urban stormwater side, and on the ag. And with the whole discussion of taxation, that just adds another layer to that funding discussion. With that, I'm going to turn it over to other people's crystal balls.
Question, we don't have a legislative agenda from here as such. There have been times in the past
We
where we
have.
had a couple of bills that, that we got behind that we wanted to push.
And probably the bill that we're most interested in, based on past experience, it was referenced earlier in Prince of Rappahannock's comments during public comment about the tree conservation legislation. But status, as was indicated earlier, the status of that is the key stakeholders have been meeting and negotiating to try to come to a consensus bill. And basically, potential patrons, and I think several members here are aware of this, patrons who expressed interest have said, unless there's a consensus bill, there will be no.
Right.
And so I think we're just waiting to see what happens in the final stages of those negotiations.
Okay.
Stakeholder members that have talked to me have indicated they're close.
But related to that, in terms of our forestry side and Rappahannock Conservation Nursery, does that go produce hardwoods or hardwoods?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's good. And the other issue related to that is solar, where there's a lot of deforestation going on in the name of green energy, which would have impact us throughout this.
And also primary.
Right.
Perhaps solar will be something that the commission in the future. Then I want to look at it, see how solar is affecting the river basin.
Be happy to.
We're having some conversations about that broad subject, so people more knowledgeable than me are involved, but the basic issue would be getting them, we think we're doing good, and we are basically eliminating forests to put solar panels that we're probably not
Here to pay Paul.
productive farmland. Yeah.
In connection with that would be follow up with what Greg Evans was working on with that forest initiative. Where is that and what's going on with that? How we've gone.
That has been disrupted by pandemic experience. And where we were was working with both Orange County, Supervisor White's on here, as well as Fauquier County, and the Secretary of Ag and Forestry's office to secure some additional funding to do the next stage of work. When the pandemic shut everything down, and I had some discussions with the Secretary back in September at Friends of Rappahannock's symposium, and they were interested in re-energizing those discussions, but now with changing administration, we'll be looking at the new Secretary of Ag and Forestry. And so I think we're just going to have to do some legwork with the new administration.
Yeah, I think we should continue to do that and try to put that down as an item to get about there. That was the best. We put a lot of work into it.
Healthy watershed forest, yes.
Yeah.
And that was mentioned briefly in.
I mean, that was kind of like a.
I did have that conversation last week with the landing team of the new administration. Bettina was in the room, with that.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other items or comments from members for future agenda items or concerns or old business, new business?
There is.
I can't let us go too quiet. I'm glad that Senator Hammer brought it up and touched on it just a little bit. I would never do anything to discourage wind power and solar power. But there are some figures and people and things that I'm aware of that. You mentioned forest, but let's talk about farmland. We may not be gaining energy advantage or environmental advantage by converting to all these big solar farms. But all that glass and taking forestry and farmland out of production, that little bit of current that solar farm produces, it may not be as good a deal as you think. We need to take a harder and longer look at that. But all. The second thing
almost regret saying, but you all know that it's been for years, I will say anything to make us think. And there's no question that I love Rappahannock, but I love all of it. I love everything that God gives. But I went to sit down on a man's porch this summer on Rappahannock. And I can't say name or location because he couldn't run for public office and never get a vote again. He told all the things you knew. He was a friend. And it broke my heart to such a degree, I didn't say anything and I didn't do anything. But there was a tree that I guarantee was on that river shore when John Smith got here. The tree was as big around as that doorway there. And it had been cut down with a power saw. And he had to tell me the story that where they had to find a man with a 4-foot power saw because the tree was so big, 8-foot diameter. I said, well, are you gonna cut it up? What are you gonna do with it? No. It was disturbing my view and I wanted to get the breeze from the river. You all imagine what that did to me? A tree that big and that beautiful. So it's simple, even though we went over all the technical things today. Remember, the greatest job we have to do is educating all people to what our environment is worth to us. So don't ever forget the little thing that's called education. This man owns a lot of land, but he wanted to get the tree out of his view and wanted to get the breeze from the river. That tree meant a lot more to me being left there than to be cut down so somebody can get a better view and breeze. That's all I'm saying. We have little things that we all need to do that are just as important as knocking down a dam or the sewer treatment plant. We have to make every individual in each county and state in the U.S. look at their environment and look at their resource and want to guard it and protect it. Thank you. I'll be quiet.
Thank you.
Come on.
More comments.
I have one other question, going back to the solar. Am I not mistaken that the state has given Dominion Power a timeline as to when they have to be a certain percentage of solar powered production? Correct?
Renewables.
Renewables.
Yeah, right, which would accomplish their large project on wind turbines.
Yeah, we don't have that much wind where I am, but we have a lot of forestry and a lot of agricultural. And so talking about this preserving definitely, but we also have had electricity, so maybe it's a matter of figuring out how we can best balance. And the general public does not realize that the electric companies have been told you have got to do more renewables, and maybe we need to get the word out there and balance out things a little bit. And then my question was, do you think with the new administration, those timelines will be stretched out some so we can get a better feel for renewables?
My opinion, there'll be a conversation about whether or not that changes or not. We'll see.
Because as much as my citizens like farmland, they like their lights to come on and throw the switch.
Mhm. And the cost of
And
service
the cost to be affordable.
Yeah, right.
Is it that 25% of your power has to be renewable?
It's a higher number than that.
Higher number than that.
Yeah.
35,
It goes towards.
Is that a federal law, that's a state law or federal law?
This is state that we're talking about, but it's part of, it's a part of, and Ellen may know more than I do about that, or somewhere in the room, but it's a part of the federal program, but that particular benchmark is state.
I think we also have to look at solar development too as a national security issue because most of the panels are being built in China.
So, I mean,
So the wind turbine.
we're gonna build wind turbines down Portsmouth now.
Oh, that-
Yep, we're gonna do it. Yep, that was a big win. We invested a lot of money down there. We're gonna do that there. Yep.
I got just one quick thing. I think the electric companies don't have to pay for the excess current individual has from their home solar system. I think everybody in the state is allowed to have their own solar system. And if they only can just get enough to pay their own bill, but not get any money from the electric company. And if somehow we could force the electric companies to do that, and then more people would have their own household solar systems, and then that would go into the excess would go in the grid, and then we may not need these.
Encourage more rooftop solar.
Right. And we need to force the electric companies to pay for the excess. Right now, they won't do it. Just let you have free electricity, but they don't do the excess.
I'm working on shared solar concept. The problem there is, and that be careful with it, because our co-ops, which a lot of us are familiar with co-ops, they have a limited profitability, and if you get into this, you're cutting into the profitability and the ability to have a low cost product. So they have concerns about the concept, and some of y'all may serve on the co-op board. Yeah. I guess there's pros and cons.
It sounds like in addressing that issue for the commission, what I'm kind of hearing is we're going to probably want to do some type of a panel discussion with multiple different perspectives, including power generation, but also farm bureau, also forestry. I know our friends with Berkeley Group over there have done an awful lot of work and efforts with local governments on the land use aspects. So our River Basin Commission followers over there may be able to help me with this effort. But I'm thinking there are multiple different perspectives that are worth putting on the table. So we understand that there is no one right answer. It's a balanced approach. Okay, I'll be working on who the experts are. Once we have a new Secretary of Ag and Forestry, we'll be doing a reach out there as well on the Healthy Watershed Forest side.
Any other items or comments? Any comments from online or any input from online? Well, seeing none, we will bring the December meeting to a close, and I will move for adjournment. We are adjourned.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Merry Christmas. I hope you have a good holiday.
I have a bookkeeping issue. If staff could just stay on for a minute.
I laid a few of them here. I put a few of them on. I got you.
Delegate Bell, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, you there?
Let's see if I can hear you with all what's going on. Let me change my camera.
Okay, this won't take but a second. It's not complicated.
There we go. How about that?
Hey, so I had two meetings at the same, oops.
Yeah.
Meetings at the same time today. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I had two meetings at the same time today, and I want to make sure I don't improperly get double billed. I don't remember how it works, but it's different if I have two meetings, which is what happened today. I had your meeting, I went off and did a second meeting, and I came back to your meeting. The other meeting was with Sarah Stanton. It's the, you don't care, but there's a subcommittee meeting of the Behavioral Health Commission. I just want to make sure that somehow we don't end up, because I'm not. If
All right,
you're
when I submit the report to the clerk's office, I'll make note that you split time between our meeting and the other meeting.
That's fine. Very good. That's all I need. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Have a good Christmas.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much.